Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond. This is episode 13 of the Web Platform Podcast. Your hosts today are myself, Eric Isaacson, UX engineer at 3 Pillar Global, Christian Smith, startup enthusiast and open source developer, and Nick Niemeyer, JavaScript agent engineer at New Relic. Today we are talking about the Internet of Everywhere and building ubiquitous products. So building software is becoming more and more about integration and connectivity. So the rise of makers and builders in the development communities is sparking innovation as well as curiosity in the business world. So from connected cars and living spaces to fashion and novelty, the Internet of Things stretches far and wide. So we are seeing more and more that our users are demanding applications that integrate seamlessly, not just with their phones and tablets and computers, but now they want it with their TVs, their security systems, and even their kids' toys. So companies are now trying to achieve this by unifying product experiences and blurring the lines between the physical and the digital worlds. Our guests today are experts in one or more aspects of these areas. We have Kunal Shah. He's a product manager at 3 Pillar Global, and he'll be talking about the product side of IoT. Mike Schwartz, CEO of glue.org, and he's speaking to the state of IoT security. Chris Matthew, creator of Skynet.im, that is essentially a real-world connected integration system based loosely on the ideas set forth by the Terminator movies, scarily enough. And robotics and JavaScript expert Raquel Velez of NPM Inc., which is the most widely used JavaScript package manager in the world. So to give a little more insight and context into what you do, could we go around, starting with Chris, and talk about your company and what you do?
So I'm the co-founder of OctoBlue and CTO of OctoBlue, which is an Internet of Everything company. And as we'll talk a little bit more, we're trying to build and build.
Hi, my company is glue.org. We're a open source authentication platform, and we're working on standards for application security, like OAuth2 based profiles, and for IoT security.
Hi everybody, I'm Raquel. I'm a software dev at NPM, do all the web things. But in my spare time, I also am one of the kind of core members of the NodeBots, which is all robots and Node, which is awesome.
As far as NPM, Raquel, your background in mechanical engineering, mechatronics, robotics is really interesting. So what initially drew you to robotics that led you to switch gears like this?
So the big thing for me with robotics was, so fun fact, before I did anything technical, I was convinced I was going to be a filmmaker. I wanted to be the next Steven Spielberg. I was going to make movies and all that sort of wonderful jazz. And then I went to an event hosted by the Society of Women Engineers. I was in high school. And basically, the short version of the story is one of the engineers at Princeton University was like, so there are all these other women who are doing really cool engineering stuff, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But hey, look, I have a robot. And she puts this robot on top of the table. And I was just like, oh my God, that's even possible. So basically, I just instantly switched gears. Like, robotics seemed like this really cool kind of cross-section between math, which I really liked, and physics, which I really liked, and building. Like, I went into mechanical engineering because to me it's like arts and crafts with big machines. But then hilariously, I ended up doing more of the artificial intelligence type stuff than I did the actual mechanical engineering type stuff. So you can kind of see like this kind of natural segue of being like, okay, so I'm doing more programming. I don't have a computer science degree, but that's okay. And then I basically eventually I got tired of doing robotics. It was really kind of lonely sitting in a lab. Normally it's a basement lab, not like anything with lights or like, no natural light. There are no windows in basement labs. It's just concrete and cold. And you don't talk to very many people. So I felt like I wanted to try something different. And eventually I found my way into the internet, and decided, hey, let's try this thing out. Then as I'm like playing around with Node and JavaScript, I met Chris Williams, who was like, hey, do you know Rick Waldron? Hey, we should all play with robots and Node together. And then NodeBots happened. So that's kind of the really quick version of how I got here.
You know, this is Chris. I'd like to interject something too. Raquel may not know this, but she and Rick Waldron are partially responsible for Skynet because she was the first person that taught me how to use an Arduino at the Node conference in the woods a couple of years ago. So I don't know if you know that, Raquel, but it's all your fault.
Okay.
So when the fire's ablaze, we know who to blame.
Yeah, it's Rick Waldron and Raquel.
Nice.
Sorry, not sorry.
Hey, Chris, what else was it that contributed to bringing Skynet to life? I mean, did you just have like this flash of an idea that said, I need to build the network behind the Terminator, or was there a progression of things that you worked on that led up to it and made it kind of a natural next step?
A little bit of both. So I've been following IoT for probably 2 or 3 years, just all the little smart things, you know, home automation things, and I was really frustrated with every single device having its own application, and this whole concept of devices couldn't talk to each other, you know, the proprietary protocols. And I'm sitting on the couch, I kid you not, watching Terminator for like the 100th time with my son, and watching all the drones communicate with each other, and the T2s and the sensors and all of this multi-protocol mesh network and stuff, and it was like that flash of light that said, if Skynet was good, this would be really cool. Then you could connect all these things and allow machine-to-machine instant messaging, and that was really the catalyst. So proof of concept a little bit later. Nick Niemeyer was also involved in some of the proof of concepts, and we found out that early on we could actually do this, and we could actually connect Arduinos and robots to it, and got a little round of angel funding, and now we've got a dozen developers building this thing for real.
It's pretty awesome that you had the insight to see that where we can get like some standardized way of doing this, because I know with web development, in my background, you know, the standards, there was a lot of initially with the browser wars, there was a lot of flame wars, you know, trying to figure out how to standardize everything. So I think it's a really open community.
Well, and right now it's a hot debate. There's hundreds of protocols out there, and we support, like you mentioned, All-Scene Alliance. We do support the All-Join protocol, as well as MQTT, WebSockets, HTTP, and CoAP, and a bunch of other native protocols. But I think that's really the glue, is not to pick a camp, you know, and try to be the Switzerland of robotics protocols, and just make it easy to bring all of them together and allow cross-protocol communications. At least that's our strategy so far, and it seems to be working.
Yeah, can we talk about the All-Scene Alliance?
No.
Yeah. Well, it's there must be probably 25 or 30 really big companies that are all banding together to help standardize a protocol that's more of a discovery, messaging, broadcasting protocol for mostly homes, is kind of what I'm seeing the use case for. So you get a new TV, you bring it home, they're all joined, you know, there's an app that can let you see all of your all joined devices in your home, and then you can easily connect it to the Wi-Fi or your Ethernet and have it discover other all joined devices near it. And what we do is we have a gateway. Most of our stuff is open source. We have an open source gateway that lets you discover all of those devices and connect them to Skynet, so that you can message individual devices. We have a fun demo where we can send tweets and messages to TVs, you know, using AllJoin, which makes it. Yeah,
I have a question.
Yeah.
How would you register and authenticate the devices?
So the gateway is registered and authenticated with Skynet, or OctoBlue rather. the devices themselves are just discoverable within the home, so they're not really uh, authenticating at this point. Is my understanding. I'm not sure there is a security model, but they're not authenticating quite yet.
Right, right. Yeah, because we're working with Toshiba on the TV use case. And so if, let's say you want to put your TV in view mode, and that means that you want to close the curtains and you want to dim the lights and turn the TV on and go to your homepage. So it's like I think that the question of how do the devices identify themselves and interact with each other, and what's the trust between those devices, is something that you really don't want to reinvent at this point. There's already standards out there to do that. Google has been enrolling clients for a long time and have automated it, and there's years of experience with SAML and other protocols. So I think that that sounds like a great idea, but I would want to make sure that when it comes to it, for it to be trusted, you need to have some type of common security infrastructure between the devices.
So that's what OctaBlue provides. So AllJoyn by itself doesn't necessarily have that built in, as far as I'm aware. With Skynet or OctaBlue, every single connected device and subdevice has a UUID and a token, and that's how it authenticates with the platform. And every UUID has 4 permissions properties associated with it, which are basically arrays of other UUIDs that can have this access. One's discovered. Yeah. One's like the ability to send it a message, subscribe to messages, and configure. So we're trying to solve that in the platform, but you're right. That's a very critical part of this whole space and discussion.
Hey, Chris, this is Kanal Shah. I would like to add that I think I might have seen this in play actually in my own home. I recently bought a new receiver, a new TV, and a new TiVo, and I did notice that on my receiver's iOS app, all the other devices were showing up. Not sure if they're using the all-seen protocols, but I did notice that from one device I can get to all the other devices, and basically there was no configuration on my part. It just, once it was on the local Wi-Fi, everything just started appearing, and all the exposed configuration points started exposing automatically.
Yeah, that's something interesting that we're seeing with AllJoyn too. We can literally send a broadcast message to every AllJoyn device in the home, and if it knows how to understand that message, we could have LifeX bulbs in the TVs and do different things based on the type of notification. So in other words, like and GE just joined the race with their Green Bean first build technology, so you could have like your oven and your refrigerator and your dryer all connected to the platform, so that when your dryer's done, it can send a message to your AllJoyn TV to say the clothes are finished. Hey, human, we did our work. Now you can fold them.
You may want to make that a profile of OAuth 2.
Yeah.
Because OAuth 1 was just for authentication, and OAuth 2 is just a high-level authorization protocol, and it gives you some basic constructs like scopes that you can use for your application-specific purposes. And so if you could define a profile of OAuth 2 where you're defining a certain taxonomy of scopes and other things that you can configure in your profile of OAuth 2. Data structures, for example. Here's a JSON object, and here are the names of the keys of those objects to get better interoperability. But you can do quite a lot within OAuth 2, and then that way enable anybody who has OAuth 2 libraries already to just adapt it to your profile. Yeah, I would encourage you not to reinvent the wheel on this stuff and to define your own protocol.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about these projects, like with looking at developer.octablue and seeing like a MeshBlu and all these things integrating, is they're running with JavaScript, they're running with NPM, right? You have a REST API on there, which is awesome, but NPM is like the guiding force for this. You have Chrome to do visualizations, where you have a plugin that you can do, like the connected car project, which we'll have in the show notes. but that runs with OctaBlue's technologies and NPM, and that's one of the things, Raquel, that I thought was amazing, because NPM, I think of, web, because the way it's history, how it started, it's part of Node, but it's much more than that. Is there a vision for the future, and with JavaScript, or why do we think that JavaScript is the language? Because you can do robotics and all this other stuff with other languages as well.
Yeah, well, so first of all, NPM definitely wants to move towards being the package manager for JavaScript, right? Like, not just Node. I mean, people are already using NPM for all sorts of not necessarily Node-related projects, right? Like, people are building all sorts of front-end web frameworks. Like, we're seeing more traffic from front-end developers than we ever thought, that we ever expected. So we're working really hard to make sure that we can do that. But of course, I'm also personally invested in seeing NPM be able to handle anything. It's funny, when we first started back in February, we would kind of like, I thought it was kind of entertaining the way our CTO Lori Voss would just be like, yeah, I mean, I want people to go to NPM for robotics and all sorts of stuff. And I was like, robotics, I mean, yeah, that's cool. I mean, we do that already, but like, it never really dawned on me like just how prevalent NPM would become in just everything related to JavaScript. And so then you kind of alluded to a second question, which was why JavaScript for robots? And my canned answer is, why not JavaScript, right? We already use JavaScript. So the thing is, okay, I think about it this way. If we think about the number of people who write JavaScript right now, right? It's hard to quantify, because you don't really necessarily say, oh, well, based on the number of Sun machines that are out there, this is the number of people who are writing in Java or whatever, right? Like, when it comes to JavaScript, basically anybody who does any sort of open or like any web stuff at all, they're writing JavaScript, right? I mean, you have your very specific front-end developers who only do HTML and CSS, but I would venture that anybody who's touching jQuery is using JavaScript. Anybody who's doing primary like single-page applications is using JavaScript. Anybody who's using Node is using JavaScript. So here are all of these people who I would argue is a very large number of people who could hypothetically start playing with robots. Why would you change the language that they know so that they can play with something that they don't know yet, right? Like, why increase the barrier so many times when it could just be, hey, let's all play with JavaScript. You already know JavaScript, so let me introduce you to this blinking light, which sounds really silly, but I kid you not, and I'm sure Chris can attest to this. When we run NodeBots workshops and we introduce people to the blinking light, like, hey, okay, your first task is to make this LED blink on and off. People look at you like you're crazy, like it's just an LED. But then they sit there and they're like, I have no idea how to do this. And you see this just like gradual change in kind of the way that they present themselves. It's like, at first it's like, whatever, this isn't that hard. And then they're like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing. And then they're like, I think I might have figured it out. And then the light starts blinking and they're like, oh my goodness, I am Prometheus. I have brought fire to the earth and I am amazing. And it's just that one tiny moment that you're like, and look, it was all JavaScript. And they're like, fantastic. Now give me all of the components so I can build all the things. And if you're Chris, start a company that does Skynet. I mean, that's awesome.
Raquel's hit the nail on the head. Jacob Rosenthal has a quote that if you can blink a light, you can control the world. I was like, that is profound.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It occurred to us, to this Christian, it occurred to Eric and I before this recording, that it might be kind of a bad idea to put you evil geniuses together. Is there some kind of dystopian future that, I mean, are you together, Raquel and Chris? Are you like Miles Dyson? in two people? Do we have to worry about Terminators now?
Well, if memory serves me right, Miles dies because they come back in time to kill the inventor. So I'm gonna leave that to Raquel.
I don't see why the answer isn't why not JavaScript, but why not all the above? As long as we have different people out there, they're going to have their own preferences, and I don't see any reason why we need to settle why robotics should be JavaScript any more than we should settle whether it should be like Brown. What's the difference?
One of the reasons to go with JavaScript, besides just the ubiquitousness of the language, is the evented I/O model really works well with robots. If anytime you're like, oh, we're just going to like wait for an event for a button to press, or we're going to send an event to blink an LED, it's an easy mental model. It really works well, and that's not to discourage people from doing robots in every language they can imagine, but it is a pretty good fit, surprisingly.
I don't know if you're able to see the diagram that I put up, but this diagram is part of the Open Interconnect Consortium. That's a consortium of Intel, Samsung, Cisco, and a number of IoT vendors who are looking to figure out, okay, they totally get it. We want all the devices to talk to each other. But how you actually do that and what's different about IoT, I think that, and this diagram, if you look at it, it has one really interesting thing, which it says that client to cloud is solved. And I don't know in what way they think it's solved. But I think this type of diagram shows to you the complexity of, okay, not just what kind of device do you have, but there's going to be a huge diversity of devices out there. Some of them might not even have IP. Some of them might be Bluetooth. And so how are we going to deal with this new diversity and this new type of paradigm of connectivity where it might not be connected for long periods of time? So
at OctaBlue, we've been trying to solve this with multi-tiers, basically. So the whole platform is open source. It can run, the MeshBlu platform, it can run as a mesh network. The gateway lets you connect home automation devices or things without IP addresses to the platform. We have a mobile app that just was approved by the App Store yesterday called MobiBlu, and we're hoping to use that as the wearables, the way to connect BLE wearable devices to the platform. And then we've got a really cool sketch that Raquel, if she has time to play with it, I would really love to hear feedback, but it's called MicroBlu, and it's a sketch for Arduinos and Spark devices. And it connects them to the MeshBlu cloud, whether it's running private or public, and it uses Fermata and Johnny 5, and you're able to do all the pin controls as to sending messages to a UUAD with all the security model in place over Skynet. So we're trying to tackle lots of tiers, kind of as you mentioned there, Michael, that not everything's cloud. It can be mesh. It can be peer-to-peer, or it could be peer-to-peer. And I think JavaScript for us is working well too.
Well, no one has figured out what is the user interface to allow people to manage their devices.
Chris, isn't this something that OctaBlue is working on as well?
Yes, we hear people mention that all the time. Like what is the UX of a machine? I think we're still trying to
How do you
figure out.
manage your policies? And how can you manage them centrally? If you have 500 devices in your house, each with its own APIs that you need to control access to, how do you control which are the policies for who can open the front door with their biometric fingerprint? So how do you centralize policies? But yeah, I think also even the basics, like how do you for example, OpenID Connect uses WebFinger for discovery. You mentioned discovery before. Well, in WebFinger, basically you would make a GET to the IP address to a standard URL, and that would return its configuration information. And you would define your discovery protocol there. So it seems to me like the types of things that you're defining in your API, I mean, if to get interoperability, you're going to need standards that every platform can implement. And The API that you're describing sounds great, but it should probably align to already existing standards for how clients and people are authenticated.
Yep. So we try to support standards where available, but if we wait to drive the standards, we'll miss this window of opportunity. So what we're doing now is we have an open plugin architecture on the gateway, and it's all powered by NPM, so that you can write plugins for every specific device that you want to connect to OctaBlue. So we added Locatron, Belkin Wemo, Insteon, Philips Hue, LifeX bulbs. Any other devices that if we don't support them today, any JavaScript node developer could write a plugin and then connect those native protocols to OctaBlue as well. So I mean that's our current strategy so far, and it's working. There's a decent sized ecosystem around that MeshBlu and GateBlue product.
So from a product perspective too, let's say I have some clients that I'm doing an application for that's web based, let's say, and then we further find that we'd want to control it to control some hardware. So we get some Arduino and we get some other hardware. What are the challenges with getting languages and protocols to work with that as far as to getting into that type of development? So developers out there, if they want to get started using NPM and upselling their current strategies for application development into the IoT space, what are some tools and ways to help that?
Well, I would say that the Arduino ecosystem and the Spark ecosystem, and all these newer boards, Teslas, BeagleBones, Galileos, I mean, they're growing very rapidly. You can pick up all sorts of sensors for really, really inexpensive these days. And I think it's really just your imagination is the limit, really. Just like what types of sensors do you want to control with an Arduino? We're trying to make it easy to control it through kind of drag and drop designer, with still giving function nodes where you can, as a JavaScript developer, extend the platform as needed. And then if we don't support a product that you have in your home that you want to automate, you could write an NPM module that acts as a plugin for that protocol. So what I'm hoping is that we're giving makers or home automation people or even large enterprise customers a platform that can scale to meet their needs, whether it's a private type of a cloud solution out on a construction site or a very a hosted cloud service or hybrid, if you will. In security, I mean, if you're that kind of paranoid type of an individual with your tinfoil hat, you could run most of the stack or the whole stack right on a Raspberry Pi in your home and untether that from the internet.
That's exactly the point. Is that that is what's going to happen. You're going to see that the policy decision point moves probably to the home router or to other devices, that there could be multiple authorization points in your home. That's why I don't think any one solution or one is going to solve it. But I do think that if you can align your solution with standards like OpenID Connect, for example, that's a final standard. That was 5 years in the making. It started in 2009. But the harder questions about access management, when it comes down to it, all these things that you're talking about are going to have APIs, right? And are those going to be web APIs or direct socket APIs?
Well, our API actually runs on all native protocols. So we have a REST API, WebSockets, MQTT, and CoAP. And so I believe that the API is really relevant to the machine or the thing that's connecting to the platform, right?
Well, that's the policy enforcement point. That's the first. You want to authenticate, let's say, a person on access, but every time they go to a resource, you want to authorize.
We do that.
And the APIs are the resources. It's sort of the first level of coarse-grained authorization. It's like getting through the door.
Yep. So there's authentication with the UUID and token, and then there's authorization at every request.
That's a proprietary mechanism that you defined, and that would be really hard for a business to manage. So they wouldn't want a one-off client management system somewhere. So the best idea would be to just align with the OpenID Connect standard, because that already defines client discovery, crypto authentication. It defines everything you'd ever want for client authentication. dynamic client registration, and it's extensible with scopes, and you can customize it. So I would say, first off, just switch to that, because you don't want your own REST API for client authentication. You'd basically be ignoring like the last 15 years of like work around how to do that well. I don't know, sorry to be the contrarian on your call, but I know how excited you are about designing all these things that connect, but in my opinion, unless you can secure it, maybe it's not worth connecting.
Or find a happy middle ground.
I think you've got some good points, Michael, and security is at the top of our list. I mean, we actually have a patent that's pending right now on our approach, because it's a lot deeper than what I was able to articulate in this couple of minutes. And
that doesn't sound very open source.
yeah, we've got money coming into this OctoBlue platform. So 80% of our tech is open source, and then it's kind of like GitHub. So all the platform and infrastructure is open source. Right. The actual OctoBlue app.octoblue site is closed, kind of like GitHub.com.
Well, I got to tell you, a proprietary client authentication is not going to happen, because at most companies, they're going to move to open standards that are 100% open source, not 80%. There's cloud applications, there's open source applications, there's enterprise applications. Now there's IoT. We can't make a whole nother way of authenticating just because there's something that's differentiating itself. Okay, so it's on my network, so I'm carrying it around. So what? It's a device. I don't really think it makes any difference, and it's not going to be we're not going to make a new standard for you.
Guys, I actually have a couple of questions. If we step back from languages and standards and stuff for a second, Raquel, you're really into math and AI and stuff like that, and also Chris, I know there's some principles, some big principles that are not specific to Skynet or MeshBlu. I think it's MeshBlu is what it's called now.
Yeah. So, but all throughout the code, it still requires Skynet NPM module. But yeah. The label is MeshBlu. So
if we step back from like actual products and things like that, like what would be helpful for someone that wanted to get into this field? If you were to, let's say, if you were to design a course of self-study for someone that wanted to start hacking on robots and hardware, I mean, what would we be talking about? Linear algebra, search algorithms, neural networks? What kind of stuff outside of, say, JavaScript and stuff? What should I be learning?
So there's a multiple different ways of thinking about this, right? Let's think about it in terms of like Legos. So basically, on the surface, you just want to build a really cool Lego castle, right? In some ways, you can be like, okay, let me just find the instructions for the Lego castle, and then let me just take all the Lego pieces that I have, and then build a Lego castle based on the instructions, right? And the corollary to that would be to find all the NPM modules. Like, let's say you're doing JavaScript, right? Or just all the different libraries, base libraries that other people have built, and then putting those are your different color Legos, different size Legos. You can put all those things together, and you can follow the instructions of somebody else, and you can make your robot do everything that already exists, right? So like you can use the tools that already exist out there to build things that are really cool, really awesome. But some people are going to go a little further, right? There are going to be people who are going to be like, I don't have any purple Legos. I need a purple Lego, right? And in that case, it could be my robot doesn't understand SLAM, which is simultaneous localization and mapping. The idea is you have a robot in the middle of a room, and it uses its sensors to kind of make a map of the room it's in, and at the same time knows exactly where it is at any given point, right? Like, so that's a really difficult problem to solve, but it's a really common one and a really interesting one. Right now, there's no SLAM NPM module. It doesn't exist. I haven't written one. I don't know anybody who's written one yet. Maybe it does exist. I'll have to do a search. But anyway, the point is, so that's your purple Lego. So if you wanted to do that and it doesn't exist yet, now you're going to have to actually go out of your way to learn all the things that are required to start implementing that module. But I like to think about it as, so like for me, I built a module called Vector, which is just a really basic linear algebra module for robotics, right? So it allows you to do kinematics, which in the most basic of terms is it basically allows you to do things like having a serial manipulator, which is like those industrial robots, right? That like pick and place sort of things. So you can build one of those online or with actual hardware using this module. You don't have to know any linear algebra to use it. You just need to know the basics of how everything works. I'm hoping to make another module that sits on top of that module that then allows you to know even, like, you don't even have to know all the special details. You just have to know higher level sort of stuff. So the idea is that if you want to do something that doesn't exist yet, yes, you're going to have to learn things like linear algebra, like computer vision. You're going to need some differential equations. You're going to need neural networks, probably not a bad idea. Like there's all sorts of things, but it can be really daunting and really intimidating. And the last thing I want is for somebody to look at especially at NodeBots and say, this is too hard, I'm not even going to try. Mostly because I think education is backwards, and this notion of, well, you need to pass all of these tests before you get to do the fun stuff is kind of bonkers. I'd much rather you start with the really fun stuff, ask the questions of, wait, but how do I make it do this other really cool thing, and then learn the tools that you need in order to do that. So for me, that's kind of the most important mega piece. Like, first start with what's out there. Build the castle with the red and the yellow and the blue Legos. And then when you need that really nice purple Lego, then go ahead and start building that purple Lego and then kind of move forward. Because chances are by the time you get to wherever, someone may have already built the purple Lego. Who knows?
Beautiful answer. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chris, do you have a take on this?
I think Raquel did an amazing job at that. And listening to her in her classes, she takes the same approach. So when we were trying to get the LED to blink, I just wanted to see the thing blink, and then that was enough to pique my interest to start diving down a little bit deeper to see how did that work. That was awesome. It blew my mind. How did that work? And I think she's spot on. That's how learning should be. How do you keep it fun? You know, especially like educational environments. Like when we demo like some of our designers drag and drop, being able to like control Arduinos with drag and drop. Kids really gravitate to that, and teachers. There's an ASU professor that wants to use it in their curriculum this year in one of the engineering classes. So I think that's an important tool that gets people excited about this technology. How do I make that LED blink or light up, and then we'll figure out where all the engineering practices that make that possible.
What are the challenges to getting firmware or even like some kind of runtime on these Arduinos or any type of board? Like Tesla has a built-in JavaScript runtime. Is there other things you need to consider?
So with what we're trying to do, there's been we're standing on a lot of tall shoulders. So like things like Fermata have made it really easy to interact with Arduinos, where you can load one sketch and then control it with, NodeBots. I think the whole JavaScript approach that Tesla took is amazing. I mean, it's kind of like Git. You just kind of say Tesla push and whatever your JavaScript code is, and it just runs. Kind of back to that point that Nick and Raquel were making earlier. That's just JavaScript's everywhere. It's the language of the web. Why not the language of robotics too? I think that's a great approach by Tesla. And then what we're trying to do with the MicroBlu sketch is that giving that Arduino a UUID and having it auto register itself with a UUID and a token, and then its presence comes online. Now, like, you don't have to like program that Arduino at all in C. I mean, it just comes online, you claim it, and then you're able to start interacting with it on the platform. I think it's fast to get up and going today to do difficult things in a very quick way.
The one sketch to control with remotely from other computers is hugely powerful, because that loop of compiling and loading new sketches really increases the time to feedback. Makes it hard to learn new things for sure.
Well, and I would also say that if you've got that microcontroller in the field, you might not have access to go out there and plug it in and load a new sketch. So I mean, having that universal fermata, makes it easier to support and access, globally.
I think we're still in the wild west kind of place in terms of where we are and what people do with this whole Internet of Things thing. For the most part, the projects that I hear about tend to be more hobby sorts of things. Some bigger companies are certainly curious; they're looking into it. But for the most part, I see people doing fun things like hooking up their music players to a button so that when you walk in the door, you hit a button and suddenly music is playing in your house. Like, that's fun. Something that, like, when you leave, when the car rolls out the garage closes for you instead of having to wait for you to press a button, or things like that. I don't think that I haven't seen too many people really pushing microcontrollers the way that I know them to their fullest potential, mostly because of this whole standards issue, mostly because of this whole people are still figuring out what they're for and what's exciting about them. I don't think they're going to go the way of the QR code. I do think that they're going to be really prevalent, but there are a lot of questions that still need to be answered. Standards, security, just overall ubiquity. Like, how do we get these things into the hands of different people when you have 17 different types of microcontrollers and 10 new coming every week? I don't know. These are really big questions that I think.
Well, they better know how to design them right in the first place. And,
Yeah, well, I mean,
and the way that they would do that is by having clear open standards like ISO and other IEEE and W3C or OASIS or outer curve is another one that I like. So I'd say, yeah, by developing standards so that these guys who are developing their new boards know how they should make it. It's obvious.
Well, okay, so here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. Okay, like I appreciate that you're pushing really hard for standards, and I also push really hard for standards. I think that it's an interesting take that Skynet's taking. It's the don't worry, you do what you need to do. We'll take care of everything for you. There's also the other push, which is, hey, everybody, let's all agree on something, and let's all come together and then kind of say, hey, if you want to keep playing in this arena, you've got to at least, at a minimum, follow these basic steps. And I think the problem is that we're not looking at a bunch of hobbyists, right? It's not just a couple of people kind of tinkering in their backyards anymore. There are huge corporations, there are middle-sized corporations, there are small companies, there are hobbyists in their backyards, and getting everybody to agree on something is really hard, and it's not going to happen until somebody says, here, we're doing this, we are successful, and we're making this happen. So I think we need to kind of do that and bring people together and have somebody say, like, we need a proven option before we just say, okay, well, we need standards. Well, yes, obviously we need standards. Otherwise, we're not going to move forward. But where do we go from there? How do we get there? How do we even start that conversation without saying, okay, well, here are all these standards that already exist. Now everybody start using them. Well,
okay, well, you start by writing basically a proposal for a standard and asking for interested parties to join. If you don't take that first step, then obviously it's never going to happen.
Absolutely. So who's going to start?
I was going to say
even Google.
There's several alliances that are doing that already. So I mean, if you want to get caught up in all Allscene and Intel's alliance and all the others, they're always looking for people to help with those efforts. I totally agree with Raquel that, I mean, we've got an amazing ecosystem with JavaScript, NPM, NodeBots, a lot of interesting technologies that just work today. So where standards exist, I agree. We should use them and adapt them, and that's what we're trying to do with the protocol support. But where it's not, let's all just keep innovating, moving forward, solving problems, like like all of the developers at OctaBlue, Nick included, Christian included, we're building this. We want to be part of this because we want to control things like our garage door opener in our home, like the node copters, outside, whatever. But to Raquel's point earlier, now that we are a company, OctaBlue is, we are being approached by all sorts of really big companies like smart city endeavors, like medical sensor suppliers, like point of sale, like global point of sale technology solutions, and they're trying to figure out how can they leapfrog their competition by having an IoT angle to their product or platform, or tie it all together.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's interesting, especially when you get multiple protocols being able to talk together. You're able to.
My advice to them is always, if you can't bill for it, then it's not very good, and you can't bill for it until you can control access to it. So that's why you start with security. I think that sure, if there's not you're not going to not do something because the standard doesn't exist. But I think that when you start implementing things like security, and you don't really do your thorough like check as to, okay, what is the best practice for security, then maybe you're not really using standards when they exist. Maybe you're just going out off and doing whatever you think's most expedient for your programming.
The people who actually do it and innovate and start, making these failures or successes, they're doing something. Those are the people that will have the most influence on these standards, because they'll have the metrics to back up what worked and what didn't work.
I don't know. Well, for certain things, sure, but for security, no. They're eventually going to have to be aligned because nobody wants a one-off for security. So maybe it's up to people like you to provide leadership and say, okay, security is a hard problem. We understand that we're going to really have to make this clear. Here's our profile of security, and here's how it aligns with OpenID Connect, and here are our taxonomy. But I don't know. I think that if you just go off and do your own thing in security, you're adding to the mess we currently have.
I mean, to Raquel's point earlier, we're still kind of in the cowboy phase here. It's the Wild West. Everyone's kind of going off and doing their own thing, and I think that sort of spreading of approaches is important before standardization. Standardization is paving the cow paths is one of the ways that the standards are very effective. If you're standardizing what people do anyway, as opposed to what people think you might want to do, I don't know, you get effective protocols.
I think that, well, you can't fight the economics. The truth of the matter is that as long as IoT vendors can ship products without security and without central management of security, and people buy them, they'll continue to make them. So you can't fight that economic fact. The fact that shipping bad security today means you have to replace it tomorrow is an added bonus for the manufacturers. So obviously they could care less about security. You would think the open source community would have more of a sense of obligation to do right by the consumer.
I think they do, though. Like there's groups like OWASP that are doing great work in that space.
Well, right now, if you just do a search on IoT, I bet you half of the articles come back about how IoT security no one has any answers to this. And that basically is, if everyone keeps on doing their own thing here, we're going to have a mess of devices that don't talk to each other. The percentage of devices that you have that are Skynet will be small compared to your devices that came from Korea and Japan and China and elsewhere that don't have your network.
Okay, so Michael, now I'm finally connecting my disconnect with where you're going. I've been looking at this from a platform, microcontroller, security perspective, and I think what you're mainly concerned about is the manufacturers that are producing these 50 billion connected devices.
Well, device interoperability, whether it's something you built yourself, which is great. I have kids too, so I love this idea. But whether you build it yourself or whether you're getting manufactured device, you want that stuff to work together.
Yeah.
I'd just like to backtrack a little bit. I know we danced around this a little bit earlier, but just to clarify for those that don't know, can we talk about robots and the node bots specifically and what they are?
Yeah, definitely. So NodeBots is just robots programmed with Node. So where Node is server-side JavaScript, and yeah, so the Node part is pretty self-explanatory. Robots, though, I think is a more interesting word to talk about, because sometimes people think about robots as being these self-knowing robots like R2D2 or C3PO. Like those are robots, and anything less than that is not a real robot. I would argue that a robot is really anything that takes information and then does something with it by itself. Well, not necessarily by itself, right? Like, so there are three categories of robots. There's the remote control robots, which is some human is controlling everything, every decision that it makes, everything like that. So that's your remote control car. That's your kind of robot that lives in a factory, or that's the medical robot that like lives 3 countries away, and you have a doctor in one country and a patient in another country, and like the doctor is doing surgery on the patient. Like those are really cool robots. They're still robots even if they have no decision making on their own whatsoever. Then you have semi-autonomous robots, which are the robots that basically they take a lot of command from humans, but then they also make decisions on their own. So that's like your Mars rover, right? So that the Mars rover basically takes information and like human says, hey, go check out that hill over there. And then the Mars rover says, okay, that hill, to get there, I need to take this path. And then when I get there, what do I do next? Hey, human, tell me what to do. Human says, hey, take a sample. And now the robot says, okay, to take a sample, I need to drill a hole, and then I need to do this thing and do that thing. And so it's making all of those decisions by itself, but then also taking information from a human. And then, of course, you've got your autonomous robots, which are your C3POs, that basically make all of its own decisions. There might be a seed sort of thing from a human, but then otherwise it navigates the world by itself. It fully understands what's going on and kind of makes its own decisions. So in the world of NodeBots, a blinking LED totally counts as a NodeBot. So does a biped, like a robot that looks like a human with 2 legs that dances and does a pirouette by itself. Like that's totally a robot too. And so that to me, NodeBots encompasses all of everything about robots, but then also with this extra caveat that we're using JavaScript.
How does that robot know what human it's talking to?
How does a robot know what human it's talking to? Is that your question?
Yes.
It really depends on what the human decides the robot needs to know in order to know what human it's talking to. I don't believe in the robot apocalypse. I think they're
You have to bridge the meat gap, right? Your robots in cyberspace, your person's in meat space. Somehow you have to bridge this cyberspace meat space gap. And
So
that's where you're leaving it very fuzzy how that
well,
happens.
in OctaBlue, humans have UUIDs too. So we're all on the same playing field with the robotics and NodeBots and humans and even.
If I'm a human, you tell me is that like a username? I type it into the robot?
No. So when you log into OctaBlue, you actually get a UUID and a token. You still OAuth 2 and authenticate, but you have a UUID that now your robots know who you are.
So when I log in, basically you're saying that your site is using username password authentication to identify the human.
But then you have a UUID associated with your profile that the machines know you by.
Okay. Well, I was just pointing out that statement, it packs a little. It sounds so easy. I tell the robots out there, and they're like, okay, who is this person? The person logged in at Skynet, but that doesn't help me because I'm a Toshiba TV. So I think at that point, it sounds so stupid, but you have to figure out, how do I know which piece of meat I'm talking to?
Hey, do you see this car? Raquel was talking about NodeBots. This $100,000 rally fighter by Local Motors is a NodeBot. It has an Arduino and Skynet running in the glove compartment, and you can control its headlights, its hazard lights, its windshield wipers, door locks, almost everything but being able to drive it. That's
protected by passwords?
No, it's by a 36 character UUID and a 32 character
But the
token. So
person who actually does the controlling, I imagine, is identified with a password.
well, we have an API, so we can open permissions up or lock them down, depending on what mode it's in.
So that doesn't
If
sound amazing. That sounds terrifying to me.
this is Skynet.
So, Raquel, one thing I hadn't thought about before is, does a blinking LED then count as a fully autonomous robot?
I would argue no, because it's not making any decisions. I mean, you could argue that it's deciding to turn on when the 1 goes up and turns off when the 0 goes off. Like, but I don't think so. I don't think it's. I think that's it's a remote control robot. I think you're sending a 1 and a 0, and it's turning on and off based on that information. You're not saying turn on if the room is dark, right? So like now there's like a quote unquote thought process going on in there.
I think that's probably fair. Some of my favorite uses of NodeBots aren't really robots at all. It's there's human input, but there's no output on the other side. Is there another category for that specifically? If all you have is a button but no LED that it blinks?
Well, I mean, you have a button, but then it must do something, right? Like, otherwise I would say then it's just a button and not actually a robot. But like the people who have like these node bots that basically allow you to press a button to deploy to GitHub or something, or like deploy to staging, those are great. I would say those are remote control robots. Because it's not doing anything special. It's just like turning on an LED. You press the button and then it, go to staging or whatever, deploy.
So what we're trying to do too, and I'll get your feedback on this, is every transaction or sensor data that flows through OctaBlue, we're now streaming to Splunk and Elasticsearch. So we're hoping that some smarter minds than us with machine learning can leverage that data to add more intelligence to all of our little robots.
That is awesome.
Is there anything that we haven't covered that we really need to talk about?
In December, Chris Williams, who brought us JSConf, will be bringing us RobotsConf, which is language agnostic. So whether you're a JavaScript developer, a C developer, and I don't know, whatever, Hadoop, like whatever language you do, doesn't matter. But it's basically, think of it as 2 solid days of just learning from some really smart people about machines and robots and the Internet of Things, etc. But then also an entire room of every sort of maker thing you can think of, from laser cutters to 3D printers. Last year they had like 10 3D printers. It was amazing. To every component you can think of, to just kind of play. It's like playtime for budding roboticists, and lots of people around to help. Just kind of have fun, play around. It's in Amelia Island, Florida, so December in the U.S. is cold. Amelia Island is warm. Just leaving that out there. So hang out in a hot tub and play with robots. Maybe not at the same time, but it's a really cool opportunity. That's robotsconf.com. So just pitching that.
So this is Kanal Shah again. One final question I have for both Michael and Chris. So both of you have 2 opposing views in terms of Internet of Things and products. So Michael from a security standpoint, and Chris from a kind of a smart platform hub perspective. What are your thoughts on SmartThings, the company that's based out of Washington D.C.? They recently got acquired by I believe Samsung. I think their approach in terms of having a singular platform, various mobile applications to control various different devices within your home, they've been extremely successful, and they do have a large amount of customer base, but they do look at both sides, looking at the open platform as well as security.
Well, for one, I think they sold too early. I think they could have made a lot more money if they'd have stayed in the game a little longer. On a serious note, what we think we're doing is we're disrupting the companies that want to take the closed position. So if a company wants to say our products will only work with our products, what I'm hoping is we continue to build protocols that connect those products to a platform that allows them to interoperate. So outside of the manufacturer's goals of those products, you should be able to take a Belkin Wemo light switch and control a Philips Hue light bulb just as easily as connecting together and doing machine-to-machine instant messaging, and with all the right security controls in place. Totally agree with that. So I think that as we stay at this, I think the manufacturers are going to have to take that into consideration. If they're going to remain competitive, they do need to start focusing on open technologies, open protocols. A light color should all be the same. I mean, some of it's hue saturation, some of it's RGB, some of it's decimal values. I think we do need to learn how to work better together, but it is the Wild Wild West, and I think these things will be figured out as adoption grows.
And your thought, Michael?
I don't really. I think that you're on the right track. That it is you have to go from this, from build from from where you're at, and actually the manufacturers sound like they're more ahead on standards than you guys are. They're already trying to figure out how to get alignment on the standards, and they have the standards in place. So it sounds like that they need to do a better job of evangelizing the standards that we have, so we have a good starting point, and we can work on the stuff that doesn't exist, and let the implementations lead those things too. By the way, that's okay too. They want to see the open source. So I don't know. I think that the industry is not closed at all. Like if you're a big manufacturer, you know that your stuff's going to have to work with Google and Facebook, and and even Google recognizes that not everybody will be going to Google properties, that they might have people who are authenticated somewhere else that come to their domain or use their devices. And we're seeing that the manufacturers are becoming basically service providers, where they used to just ship boxes. They're now maintaining networks of devices, and that are sometimes active when the people are not even there. So I think that the manufacturers are totally aligned with open standards. There's no resistance, and there's no illusions that any closed system is going to work. It sounds to me like what you're describing is that once you get beyond to this realm of where there are no standards for the taxonomy of the new stuff, the APIs that you're working on, what are the return values? What are the APIs for your specific controllers or robots? I think that, yeah, you're going to have to work on that, and the implementations are going to lead. But if you build this whole thing on a bad security framework, it'll be a footnote, or either that, or you'll waste tons of time having to fix it later. So I would definitely advise you to not delay looking at how you architect security interoperability, and look at open standards like OpenID Connect and other profiles of OAuth 2 like UMA, or developing your own profile of OAuth 2 if you feel like you have authorization requirements that are different from Facebook or from authenticating a person. So anyway, I think that it's glad to hear I'm glad to hear your enthusiasm for what you're doing, and I think that your devices will be awesome. And I wish I had time to try and build some robots myself. I think I'd be more inclined to use a Python robot, to be honest. Um, I've seen some boards that have built-in Python, um, but I think I'm going to teach my kids JavaScript after hearing this. So sounds like maybe um, they that might be more useful to them. So.
Michael, do you want to start? Is there any like if people want to find out more about what you do and and Glue, how can people find you?
We're at glue.org, and if you follow us on Twitter, we're Glue Federation, and there's a lot of info out there. Our platform is really open source. It's used around the world. We just sell support on the platform. Yeah, so definitely have a look. We were very active in standards bodies, particularly for OAuth 2, because we feel like that's where the new development's coming from. And so And there's a lot of undefined in security. There's actually, we've just defined how to authenticate the person and the device and authorize APIs, but how you go a level beyond that is really a mystery to everybody right now.
Raquel?
Lots of really great things are happening at NPM. Super excited about cool stuff that's coming up soon. I mean, I could talk about that, but I'm not going to. Just pay attention to what's going on NPM. Then, of course, NodeBots. Definitely check us out, nodebots.io, nodebots.io. The best way to contact me is on Twitter, honestly. Rockbot, ROCKBOT, on Twitter. You could email me, but I'm bad at email, so Twitter is definitely the best way to get a hold of me.
Yeah, I would just say everyone on this call needs to just keep doing awesome things. We use all of your technologies, and so I would say NPM, NodeBots, Anvil. Nick has done some amazing things with our platform, all the Docker stuff behind the scenes. I would just say keep being awesome, keep moving this industry forward as innovators. To Michael's points around security, I think that they are very important, that we should still consider or still strive to having a lock-solid security strategy for the Internet of Things on a global perspective. And then I would say stay tuned for private betas. They're being released on OctaBlue as we speak. So you can go to octablu.com, click on the sign up, the beta sign up, and we're sending emails out soon. And for folks on this call, don't worry, I have your email addresses. We'll be sending yours out shortly as well. And hit me up on Twitter. That's probably the best way to do it. And go to RobotsConf.
Kenal?
Yeah, my Twitter handle is Kenal Shah, KENALSHAH, and I do like to add that this has been a very educational podcast for me. Learned a great deal about the various different backgrounds that each one of you have, and look forward to kind of going back and doing some additional research around Node.js and security, Internet of Things, and really see how that can be applied from a product perspective. And it's this has been great.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and I really appreciate it. This has been really awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Indeed, thank you.
This episode comes to you, at least in part, through the support and sound equipment generously supplied by 3 Pillar Global. 3 Pillar is a software product development company in Fairfax, Virginia, and 3 Pillar is a leader in creating purposeful and innovative product experiences. 3 Pillar is recently named to the Washington Post Top Workplaces list for 2014. So if you want to follow 3 Pillar on the Twitters, it's at 3 Pillar Global. And to find out more and see current job openings, please visit 3pillarglobal.com. That's 3 the number, pillarglobal.com. Thank you.